What's going down, everybody, and welcome back to another CAD Pop Patreon Decktech. Let's hit it right now. All right, we are back with another CAD Pop Patreon Decktech. This time, Yurlok the Scorch Thrash from my good friend and Patreon supporter Chris Von Doom. Thanks for the list, and if you want to get yours featured on the YouTube channel or on the podcast proper, you can head on over to patreon.com/cadpopcast, find the appropriate reward tier, and of course, reap the benefits of becoming a patron. The Altered Art card of the day on the CAD Pop Twitter account at CADPopcast, the Discord, discounts on altered cards, and the other various benefits as they come up. Links to that in the show notes, of course. Thank you to all the Patreon supporters, and thank you to FusionGamingOnline.com. They're your source for all of your CAD Pop deck tech needs and all your gaming needs in general. You can buy cards from them, and of course, you can sell cards to them. They routinely have store credit trade-in bonus. You got to head over, links in the show notes as well. If you do pick up anything from Fusion, remember, leave them a little note at checkout saying Ryan from Commander at Populum sent you. It helps the show out a lot. Now, let's read Yurlok, and then let's talk about who this kind of deck is for. Yurlok the Scorch Thrash is a 4/4 Viashino Shaman for green, red, black, 1. It's got vigilance, and a player losing unspent mana causes that player to lose that much life. Mana burn for the old school players. Also, 1 tap, each player adds black, red, green. It's going to give you a bunch of mana, and there are some combos that we are playing. But before we get to all of that, remember the CAD Pop deck techs are for 3 groups of people. The new people, new to the format or new to Magic, looking to build maybe their first deck or upgrade a precon or move away from a precon to their first custom deck. The second group is the more established player, the player looking to get maybe a little bit outside of their comfort zone, build their first thing on their own or build something that they're not used to playing. And this is that kind of deck. And then finally, the third group of people, the long-time established people looking to build around a niche or a pet card or have some unique gameplay experience either for themselves or to give that to their opponent. And knowing how Chris Von Doom builds his decks, I know that this deck for him is going to fit into that third category because he is very vigilant when it comes to his opponent's experience. He builds decks specifically for people to have a good time. You'll remember his Xyrus the Writhing Storm deck we did way back when the deck techs first started. This is another one of his decks where he's looking to give, this time instead of snakes or whatever, he's looking to give his opponents mana. Whether they use it or not is what determines if they're gonna live or die. So interesting deck. And again, it appeals to that second group and that third group that are looking to learn, build, become better, and then build around old school pet cards, of which there are some of mine in this deck. Let's get to it. We'll start with some of the main stuff that's in every deck, right? The ramp, the card draw, etc. We've got about 12 ramp cards. The deck is in custom categories, big thanks to Chris, but I'm going to lump some of the categories together. In the ramp section proper, Cultivate, Farseek, Kodama's Reach, Rampant Growth, that's the standard stuff. But we've got an extra mana category as well, Belby, Corrupted Observer, and this is our first card that's going to start giving our opponents mana. And remember, mana burn exists. If you move from steps or phases to the next step or phase, you're going to lose life if Yurlok is on the battlefield. At the beginning of each player's post-combat main phase, that player adds colorless for each of our opponents who lost life this turn. Belby's going to trigger for everybody. Yurlok can give people mana that if they don't use, they're going to lose life. And then Belby's going to see that life loss and give them more mana. Hopefully they can use that mana or they're going to be in a world of hurt. Let's move on. We've got a Blinkmoth Urn. Pre-combat main phase, it's going to give them colorless for each artifact they control. And everybody's always got a couple artifacts. This comes in at 5 CMC right after Yurlok, so it's right on curve. Eladamri's Vineyard at the beginning of each player's main phase, they get green, Heartbeat of Spring. Whenever a player taps for a land for mana, they add another one. That's a mana doubler, but for everybody. Magus of the Vineyard, that is Eladamri's Vineyard, except on a creature. Now, here's 2 cards, both cards that I've played in a Tamanoa list way back in the day of 60-4. Kitchen Table, Casual. This is Mana Flare and Overabundance. Legit pet card of mine from the Invasion expansion. Green-red 1. Whenever a player taps a land for mana, they add an additional of the same type. And Overabundance deals 1 damage to them. So this is sort of doing Yurlok Light or Yurlok version 1.1. Excellent include for the deck, and bonus points because it's coming from my favorite set. Final pet card, a card that I wish every single one of my opponents ever played, and I always ask, does anybody got an extra mana they can give me? Can anybody got 1 mana I can have? This is Victory Chimes. This is a 3-drop artifact from Battle Bond. It untaps during each other player's untap step, and you can tap it to give a player of your choice, not even target player, a colorless mana. Just give them an extra mana. If they can't use it, then Yurlok's gonna hurt them. That's pretty cool. All of those are gonna give our opponents mana, hurt them, but also give us extra mana, which is, again, why I'm including them with the ramp section. We've got a bunch of standard removal next. We've got a Barrier Breach, a Wilt, a Vandal Blast, Blasphemous Act, Damnation, Magma Quake, that kind of stuff. I'm not going to go too deep into that. We've got some protection in Asceticism. This is an old school enchantment. Green 3. Creatures you control can't be the target of spells or abilities your opponents control. Essentially, that's hexproof and regenerate target creature for green 1. It's great because you can actually tap Yurlok to give everybody mana and then use green and then another one of the colors he gives you, and he regenerates himself with an Asceticism. That's really good. Constant Mists is a fog. We've got a Destiny Spinner that makes it so creatures can't be countered. We're going to talk about creatures that we don't want countered in a little bit. Heroic Intervention and Vexing Shusher. Those are just going to protect more things. Our next section is actually called Captain No Fun. Essentially, these are the control cards that the deck is going to use. I think that this deck is going to be one of those type of control decks that's just trying to navigate the board state and say things like, hey, I'm giving you mana, don't attack me, or hey, I can double your mana next turn, so just leave me alone for 1 turn. That's this kind of deck. And if people don't buy that, if they're not in the market for, hey, leave me alone for a turn, we've got some control cards here. Blood Moon, Burning Earth, that deals damage for tapping non-basics. Dosan, the Falling Leaf, is going to make people only play stuff on their own turn. Harsh Mentor is going to deal damage to them for activating abilities. Kill Switch turns off artifacts. Mogus is going to deal damage or sacrifice a creature. Great for these Punisher-style decks that are looking to punish you turn over turn. You're going to start wanting to not lose life, so you're going to start having to sacrifice creatures. We've got a Price of Glory. Whenever a player taps a land for mana, on another player's turn, you destroy that land. That one shuts off other control decks. Very powerful card. Primal Order is another really cool one that I think is a little bit underplayed. During each player's upkeep, Primal Order deals damage to that player equal to the amount of non-basic lands they control. This is like Price of Progress, but turn over turn, and I love Price of Progress. I would maybe recommend it for this deck, but the deck's probably pretty tight because I know Chris is a pretty good deck builder. Smoke, this is an enchantment that says players cannot untap more than 1 creature during their untap phase. We only really care about untapping Yurlok, so we don't care. So this is going to be an excellent control card to choke people out. Finally, we've got a Tainted Ether, and this is a pretty powerful card from Urza's Saga. An enchantment for black 2. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield, its controller sacrifices a creature or land. That's great to land that just prior to any of your opponents getting their first creature. So if they want to drop their first creature, they have to sacrifice it, or they have to sacrifice a land to keep that creature on the battlefield. That is a powerful one. Now, if we find ourselves getting locked under our own stuff like Tainted Ether. We do have a little bit of a reanimation package in Balaged Recovery, which doubles as a land, Eternal Witness, Malakir Rebirth, which again doubles as a land, or choose target creature, you lose 2 life until end of turn. That creature gains. When this creature dies, you return it to the battlefield. That is a great card. I love it. Noxious Revival, which is a Phyrexian green card, 2 life or green mana, to put target card from a graveyard on top of its owner's library. And finally, one of my favorite cards from last year, Underworld Breach, which lets you exile stuff from your own graveyard to cast other cards from your own graveyard. Now, to supplement that a little bit, we've got a card advantage section that includes some stuff that you don't typically find in card draw sections, air quotes. Argul's Bloodfast lets you pay life to draw cards, and then it flips if you have 5 or less life, and it flips into Temple of Aklazots, which taps for a black, or sacrifice a creature, you gain life equal to that creature's toughness. I think it's in here for the card advantage because we don't really have any sacrifice shenanigans, but if we did, we do have that Underworld Breach, which is excellent. Eidolon of Blossom draws a card for each enchantment that we cast, and a lot of the cards that we've went over thus far are enchantments. Enchantress's Presence is another one of those cards. Erebos, God of the Dead, is going to trigger those cards because it's an enchantment when you cast it. It's an indestructible god. Your devotion to black needs to be 5 or more or else it's not a creature, but you can pay 2 and then pay 2 life to draw a card. And this is cool in this deck is your opponents can't gain life. Phyrexian Arena, that's a standard card draw card, and Spiteful Visions. This is Rakdos Hybrid 2 enchantment. At the beginning of each player's draw step, that player draws an additional card. Okay. Kind of playing into the theme, it's kind of drawing us extra cards, and whenever a player draws a card, Spiteful Visions deals 1 damage to that player. Playing right into our Punisher Jund theme. Perfect. Finally, we've got a Demonic Tutor. It appears to be the only tutor in the deck, and if you got one, run it. Now, here's where the deck starts to get really cool. Really cool, and I never would have thought of this. This section's called Effed Either Way, and the premise of this is to make it impossible for your opponents to do stuff unless they let you have Yurlok stay on the battlefield, giving them mana. We've got Ancient Ruins, deals a damage to each player during their upkeep for each artifact they control. So they don't want to cast their mana rocks because it's going to start to punish them. So Yurlok's going to give them mana. Citadel of Pain. At the end of each player's turn, it deals X damage to that player, where X is the number of untapped lands they control. Normally, you would just tap out so you can avoid taking the damage, but now if you do that, Yurlok's going to punish you for that. Mana Web. Whenever a land an opponent controls is tapped for mana, tap all lands that player controls that could produce any type of mana that land could produce. So if you want to tap one forest, you're going to tap all of them. That's a triggered ability, so you can respond by tapping all of your forests or all of your green producing lands, but then Yurlok is going to punish you for it. Power Surge, another enchantment. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, Power Surge deals X damage to that player, where X is the number of untapped lands they control at the beginning of this turn. Again, playing right into the theme. And finally, War's Toll, an enchantment for red 3. Whenever an opponent taps a land for mana, tap all lands that player controls. You can respond by tapping, but then Yurlok's going to punish you. And if a creature an opponent controls attacks, all creatures have to attack. Another little control card, and just as often as people tapping all out and taking a bunch of damage, is they'll just not attack because they don't want to attack with everything. Often in complex board states, you see one creature that can get through, one flyer. Hey, you got no flyers? Okay, attack you. But War's Toll says everybody has to go if one goes. And if you don't want that, you just won't attack with anything. Really good include in this deck. Okay, now, we would be remiss if we didn't mention the Yurlok combos, or ways to untap them so we can continuously use them. And some of these are a little stapley, and some of these are actual combo enablers. First, we've got a Mage Rites Stone. This is an artifact for 2. You can pay 1 and tap it, and untap target creature that has an activated ability with a tap in its cost. Essentially what that means, and remember this, is we can pay 1 and tap Yurlok, and that gives us 3 mana. Essentially, we net 2 on that interaction. Then, Mage-Right Stone says, use 1 of that mana to untap Yurlok, then we can do that again. So just remember, untapping Yurlok to do that again is going to net us some mana sometimes, and it's going to net our opponent's mana a whole ton of the time. And if they can't use that mana, they're gonna take damage. And if they're not playing Jund and they need to tap their own islands or their own planes, then they're gonna either take damage or be forced to tap all of their islands or all of their planes, essentially negating counterspells or white removal. It really puts them into a pickle. We've got a Seedborn Muse that just untaps all your stuff every upkeep. So if you have to tap everything out, it doesn't matter because Seedborn Muse will just untap you. We've got a 1,000-Year Elixir, which again just says 1 tap, untap target creature, so we can get 2 Yurlok activations each turn, or 8 Yurlok activations every round of the table if we've got a Seedborn Muse, because we can do Yurlok twice per turn times 4. That's great. We've got a Staff of Domination, which just says 1, untap Staff of Domination, 2, tap, gain 1 life, 3, tap, untap target creature, so Yurlok can untap itself, and then you can pump your 1 extra mana into the Staff of Domination to untap it. This can go infinite if we have a way to find 1 extra mana, so we can untap Staff of Domination. We can pay 4 tap target creature, or pay 5 tap, draw a card. Very, very powerful card. Very, very, very combo-y. Finally, in the untap section, we've got an Umbral Mantle, and this is one of the combo pieces with Yurlok. It's a 3-drop artifact equipment that says equip for 0, which is great, and equip creature has 3, untap. This creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Again, we untap Yurlok for that 3 mana on Umbral Mantle, and we just have to find that 1 mana to activate Yurlok again. And then we can go infinite. Now we'll go all the way back to the start of the Decktech. Do you remember that Overabundance, that Mana Flare, that Heartbeat of Spring? Those are the mana doublers. Those are the cards that are going to help us go infinite with Yurlok. Additionally, we could rely on the Eladamri's Vineyard or the Magus of the Vineyard to help us get those 2 activations or 2 extra activations out of Yurlok, because they're going to give us 2 mana during our main phase. And that'll give us 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever it is, activations of Yurlok if we can continuously untap him for the amount of mana that we have on the battlefield. And every time we do that, theoretically, if our opponents can't spend the mana that we're giving them, they're going to take 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21 damage. And you pair that with something like the Seedborn Muse, where we untap everything, they can maybe take 21 damage every single turn. But if that's not the way that we're going to win, we do have our final section called Finish Him. And those cards are Comet Storm, Lavalanche, Walking Ballista, and Helix Pinnacle that we can dump X mana into. Helix Pinnacle being unique there because that one actually lets us win the game when we have 100 or more Helix counters on it, and we can dump X into it to add Helix counters to it. The other ones deal X damage, that's great. Finally, we've got a Wound Reflection. Black 6 enchantment. At the beginning of each end step, each opponent loses life equal to the life they lost this turn. Essentially, double life loss. So we go back to what I just said, 12, 15, 18 life, because you get several activations of Yurlok, even if it's not infinite, but you have a Wound Reflection, all of a sudden that 15 damage because they can't spend the mana we're giving them, or they take extra damage because they tapped lands or they had untapped lands. That 15, 16, 18 damage that they took is going to turn into 30, 32, 38 damage. That's great. Wound Reflection's great because it's life lost, and Yurlok is life loss specifically. That's why it costs 6, and this is the one that you have to use as opposed to the 5 or 4 drop damage doublers or triplers that red has to offer. So just keep that in mind. Anybody looking to build a deck like this or with Yurlok, Yurlok's ability is a life loss ability, not a damage ability. And that's the whole deck. I love the deck. I'm always excited when Chris sends decks in because he's creative, as are everybody who sends in CAD Pop decks for the Decktech. I really like doing them. They open my eyes up and they make me think of ways to use cards that I didn't even think of, right? I knew the combos with Yurlok, and I knew you needed a mana doubler or a cost reducer to make the combo work, and those were included, but the sections that make you want to keep Yurlok alive because it locks you out on mana, or the sections that just continuously punish you or make you tap out, thus making Yurlok better, really good includes. Beauty. Love the deck. Love some of the pet cards, the overabundance, the victory chimes. Really great stuff, and happy to do it. And if anybody wants to get their deck featured like Chris Von Doom did today, head on over to patreon.com/cadpopcast. Find the appropriate benefit tier. If you're able to pledge and support on Patreon, I very much appreciate it. It helps the show grow, helps keep pumping them out every second week for the Decktech and every Wednesday for Cad Pop proper. But don't forget, following on Twitter, subbing on YouTube, liking this video, all great ways to support the show completely for free. Tell a friend, or if you've got some story or experience that Magic has helped you with or helped you overcome, you can shoot me an email to cadpopcast@gmail.com. I love featuring those on the show. I love bringing people community-inspired content. All that being said, final big thank you to FusionGamingOnline.com, your source for all of your deck tech needs, your Yurlok needs. You can pick cards up there, you can sell cards there or trade them in for store credit, and whatever you do, don't forget that you can leave them a note to the vendor at checkout that Ryan from Commander at Populum sent you. That helps the show out a lot as well. And with that, everybody, I will see you next Wednesday.